I would like to share my personal journey in political organizing, and that's how I truly learned the meaning of what the establishment is and what the establishment is not. I learned what the word establishment means not from Google, but really through my own political organizing journey here in Western Queens. Now, I first moved to the neighborhood in 2015 in Astoria, and I would, go out, be social, and I used to frequent the gay bars. And at those gay bars, meeting folks with like-minded politics, but then also even one of the owners who supported Hillary Clinton. Him and I had similar views, and he even asked me to host one of my very first debate watch parties. So having this first organizing experience, I was super excited. And listen, it was a fun event. I really wanted to have fun with the decorations. So I had red, white, and blue balloons. We had streamers. We had decorated the tables. We had signs up. And it was really fun just getting to a group of people together to support a candidate that we thought would be the strongest candidate for LGBTQIA plus rights. So, especially at a gay bar, we had a fun time. Now, from that event, I also met fellow Democrats who were part of a local Democratic club, right in Astoria. So, from there, I wound up joining, and this was so transformative in my political education. I learned about the issues that were happening in our community, in our neighborhood. I got to meet city council members, state senators, state assembly members, even local judges. So from this point, it was really a rich place for networking, but also for just making those community relationships. So during that time, it was also really informative of my political education in terms of the processes. That's where I learned to knock on doors. That's where I learned to collect signatures for petitions. And that's where I learned a lot about how our democratic process works. Now, being involved in these systems, right? You meet like-minded folks, those who are a part of the local establishment, fellow Democrats who were more moderate, more centrist, and yes, the membership of these political clubs skewed older. The older generation, those who were voters over 50, those were the folks that were really packing a lot of these clubs. So for the few of us that were younger, right, we all stuck together, but we also made the best of it, and we also learned a lot along the way. So as time went on, here comes 2018. So by that point, it was the most transformative year of my life. Not only did I turn 30 years old, not only was I involved in the most political Democratic clubs and groups, but that was the year that Joe Crowley ran for re-election in New York's 14th Congressional District. From there, I was very invested in Joe Crowley's campaign. I wound up volunteering by phone banking, by collecting petition signatures, and supporting him at several events. That was where I was in my political journey, being around folks in the local establishment, from political clubs, and having a moderate point of view. Now, granted, at that time, I also had friends who were more progressive, my same age. They weren't in the political clubs, but they were researching and investing considerable time in podcasts, also in independent media, such as the Young Turks. That was back in 2018. So they were telling me about Medicare for All, abolishing ICE, and all these different progressive policy platforms that I either A, never heard of, or B, didn't truly understand. For the campaign of Joe Crowley, there was a time in May of 2018, end of the month, when their campaign, so actually it was someone in the community in Astoria who hosted Joe Crowley's campaign at their place for a backyard barbecue. Now, for the barbecue, there was a ton of just, voters, folks who were moderate, those people I knew from Democratic clubs. They also had elected officials, such as the city council member, the state assemblywoman, and the state senator at the time. All of them were there. That was the trifecta of local Democratic politics in Astoria. So when I was there at the barbecue, folks were just chit-chatting, having a good time. It was good weather out. And anyone could ask our congressman a question. Now, mind you, at the time, this was around the part of the race where Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the challenger, progressive Democrat, she was making race or leaning into her identity a lot during this election. So when you think about, she's this young woman of color, Puerto Rican background, and she was, grew up in the Bronx. So this idea that a young woman of color was challenging an older, white, established Democrat, right? And Joe Crowley was like the top Democrat. We were taking a ton of corporate PAC money. But also, he was on his way to succeed Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House, should he have won that election. So when AOC was really focusing on how, people of color, especially in our district, needed to have more representation, also to fight for the issues that really mattered to those communities. She made a great point, and that was becoming, a more competitive primary. So at this backyard barbecue, I asked Joe Crowley 2 questions myself. First, I asked him, what are your thoughts on like money in politics? His answer was basically just like, it doesn't really matter. You got companies like Coke and Pepsi, which, if you know, like they're actually owned by the same company. But he was basically making the case like it wasn't that big of a deal. And the second one is like, what's your take on Medicare for all? And that was on behalf of my friends at the time who were asking me like, get him to answer Medicare for all. We need that progressive policy. And his answer was basically like, well, I don't really support Medicare for all, but I support universal access. I think everyone deserves access to healthcare. Which, sure, I mean, like, yes, everyone wants access to healthcare, but access is not the same thing as, exorbitant prices and exorbitant costs that we talked about earlier. So it wasn't really a solid answer, and it was like, fine, just that was his answer at the time. But then, unprovoked, he then goes on to make his own little stump speech where he mentions how, at the time, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was making the primary all about race. So I don't know what prompted him to say this, but his following response was, "It's not my fault I was born white." That was the gist of what he said, and I could not believe he said that in front of elected officials, Democratic voters, and people who were supporting his campaign. A lot of us were stunned, and the fact that he thought that in 2018 this would be okay to say that, where as you may recall, the Democratic Party was so proud to be the most diverse party, also amplifying or leaning into identity politics. So that tone-deaf comment about race was just so incredible to hear in the sense of like, I can't believe you just said that. So from that point, it just made me feel so uncomfortable, and I had to really grapple with it. And it was like, how am I going to be supporting this guy? I've phone banked, I knocked on doors, collected signatures, and this guy is talking like this. I don't think I could really support him. So after really thinking about it, right, I knew this campaign was not for me anymore. I could not, in good faith, with a smiley face on, just say, oh yeah, this is the guy, knowing damn well what he just said. So fortunately, fast forward, The Intercept had covered the story. They heard about what happened. I gave them the quote of what Joe Crowley had said, and AOC later called me. I'll share more details at another day. Just know that that phone call welcomed me into the progressive movement. And AOC is someone who would take the coat off her back to give it to someone who is hurting, or someone who is vulnerable, or someone who is desperately in need. I felt so seen by her, and I knew that act of kindness still stays with me 8 years later. And I share that with you all because that is the character and the integrity of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And that is why someone like her can challenge the establishment. That backyard barbecue proved to me that the establishment is not in it for what is right. They're only in it for what's right for them. So AOC had welcomed me into the progressive movement. I quickly joined her campaign and was volunteering as much as I could, and I knew that I was doing the right thing. And on election night, I didn't know if she would actually win. It wasn't about winning. It was about doing what was right. And that's why when she did win, so many of us were overjoyed in ways that we cannot describe. The closest thing we have to that is when Zohran Mamdani won the Democratic primary in 2025, and those of us who were there for AOC and for Zohran, That was the same feeling, the same magic, the same moment that changed the course of history forever, proving that our democracy belongs to us and we can make a difference. All because we dared to dream and challenge the establishment. And that's our show. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like what you heard and want to learn more, then make sure to subscribe to Not Suitable for Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Or you can follow along on Instagram and TikTok. I use the same handle for both, so follow along at NSFD_pod. Our democracy needs to work for us. So when we use the word establishment, we are critiquing the capitalist system, dysfunctional systems, socially, politically, and economically that can make our country work for us because we deserve a progressive future. And to make that happen, get involved because that's the only way this is going to work. And remember, democracy is not suitable without you.